Welcome, fellow Rotarians and guests, this important Rotary meeting. We will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Let us pray. Lord, we pray that unity may prevail in our community. Help us to be instruments of your peace. Help us in the city to come together to resolve the issues that affect us all. Help us cooperate well in overcoming community challenges, large and small. May we each bring our experiences and our expertise to the table and work out solutions together. Help us to listen well, to emphasize and brainstorm the best path for our city. Amen. All right. I'd like to now take a moment to recognize all of our guests. In the interest of time, we won't be introducing everybody that's a guest of Downtown Rotary today, but I would like to ask that all of our guests please stand and be welcomed. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We do have a couple items of Rotary business. In the email that I sent out this morning, you would have seen that the Sioux Falls Development Foundation's Recruitment Council is presenting mentorship and talent development, how your experiences enables your success in others. That will be at the Washington Pavilion tomorrow. So please, if you can, please make it to that important event, as mentorship is one of our key pillars. We now have a couple more inductions. Has been the case throughout this year. We've just been blessed with a lot of new and important members to the Downtown Rotary Club. And I'd like to now call up Tony Knorr, who will introduce both of them today, with the first one being Lucas Fegan.
Thank you, President Herbold. Good afternoon, fellow Rotarians. It is my honor to introduce to you Lucas Fegan. He is a third-generation leader of Fegan Construction, a 54-year-old full-service commercial contractor here in Sioux Falls. Born and raised here in town, a graduate of O'Gorman High School, and earned a Master's of Architecture degree at the University of Lincoln, Nebraska. In 2012, he came back to the state, and he leads the design build department while learning to run the company from his father, Jeff, as well as his uncle, Rusty. His passion, he has a passion for the city of Sioux Falls, and he is actively involved, for those of you that know him, with many facets of our community, the Chamber, Forward Sioux Falls, other nonprofits. So we're fortunate to have him, and he did just celebrate Father's Day yesterday. He has a 7-year-old Oliver. So please join me in welcoming Lucas Fegan to Downtown Rotary.
Thanks, Tony, and thank you, Rotarians, for the acceptance of my nomination. Like Tony had mentioned, third generation of a family-owned construction company, but pretty cool to be a first-generation Rotarian. Really, love being in these groups with people, hearing your stories, being able to share my story. I was listening last week on Facebook to the Startup Sioux Falls conversation with Matt and Brianne, and they use the term community builder. And I love that word because that's really why I'm here. I love this community, born and raised, like Tony said, and just looking forward to really getting to know all of you and learning more about, what each and every one of you brings to the community, and being able to tell you, why I love it so much. So thanks for having me. And yeah.
All right. Once again, welcome to Lucas, and welcome to Lindsey Myers, who is joining us, has been part of our community for quite some time, currently in the role of Vice President, Public Relations and Communications at Avera, where she has been for over 15 years. In her role with Avera, she oversees key functions of media relations, internal communications, community partnerships, and digital media. She effectively cultivates relationships with media and ensures widespread positive and ongoing coverage of her organization. She has handled communication, as you can imagine, being in her role, living through the last 18 months, has handled a number of challenging situations across Avera's 72,000 square mile footprint. She's covered tornadoes, the hostage situation, and of course, the COVID pandemic here most recently. Before coming to Avera, she worked as a broadcast journalist, hosting a live medical television program. And as a lifelong South Dakotan, Lindsey enjoys the state, the city, and the community, and getting to know Lindsey over the last handful of years, I can tell you she's passionate about building a stronger community and will make an excellent Rotarian. So I would ask you to also now join me in welcoming Lindsey Myers to the stage and to Downtown Rotary.
Well, thank you all for having me. I'm excited to be here with so many familiar faces. I grew up in a very small town, for those of you who know me, so service is incredibly important, and I know it's the cornerstone of any community to be very involved in what we're building here today in Sioux Falls. So I'm just pleased and honored to be part of Downtown Rotary, and I look forward to serving with all of you. Thank you for having me.
Well, congratulations, Lucas and Lindsey. Welcome to Downtown Rotary, and we look forward to getting to know you even better in the future. So thank you and welcome. Well, we're now about to have an important program, and I want to thank Rotarian Vaney Hariri for facilitating today's conversation. You'll see that we have one of the candidates, Lieutenant Nick Cook, up here. We'll be breaking this up into two different segments. After Lieutenant Nick Cook is complete, then Lieutenant John Toome, who's sitting over there, will join Vaney here up on stage. I will take a moment now and introduce Lieutenant Nick Cook. Lieutenant Nick Cook began his career with the Sioux Falls Police Department in January of 2003 after working 3 years for Metro Communications. During his 18 years working for the Sioux Falls Police Department, he has served as a patrol officer, field training officer, Minnehaha County Warrant Task Force member, detective, patrol sergeant, narcotics sergeant, mobile field force commander, and lieutenant. Lieutenant Cook is a community-minded civil servant who has built trustworthy rapport among many resident groups, neighborhoods, and businesses across Sioux Falls. In his prior role as patrol sergeant, he worked to prioritize resident needs and address problem areas within the community, specifically within the downtown area, and deployed bike and foot patrol units to increase community presence and involvement. Lieutenant Cook earned a unit citation for his leadership in the department's civil disturbance response in 2020. He also was awarded the Chief's Level Commendation in 2018, was named the Sioux Falls Police Department Supervisor of the Year in 2017, and received the Morning Optimist Club Officer of the Year honor in 2009. Lieutenant Cook is a graduate of Northwestern University School of Police Staff and Command. He was raised in Sioux Falls and resides there with his wife and 2 daughters. Please join me in welcoming Lieutenant Nick Cook.
Well, welcome. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you for coming. As we get started, one of the things that you'll know is like Jason mentioned, we will be splitting this up because one of the things that was really important for us is that we don't see this as a competition or a pageant or anything like that. These are 2 individuals that have served this community really well, and we'll be honored to have either one of them. But we want to get an idea of what the future might look like under your leadership.
Certainly.
First thing, even before that, though, is how has the process been for you thus far? This is a bit of a different.
Oh yeah, I mean it's a different change of pace from what we're used to. By all means, it's with our city administration and our current leadership at the police department, and everybody that's been involved, especially in this process with you. It's been pretty smooth for something that is unknown to us as far as the process and unique. But as a whole, I think it's important to have community members part of the process and have input and questions answered ahead of time. So, yeah.
So is it just different now? Because obviously when you get to the position of chief, it gets a little bit different in terms of all the things that you have to do and all of the things that you have to engage with. How have you been feeling about that piece of it, being a little bit more of the administrator?
Oh, absolutely. Our roles change as we grow up through the police department and our career. Luckily, we have a lot of good mentors within our department and outside our department with other directors on, how your life changes.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big step in your life and the process itself. Like I said, luckily, with Chief Burns actually sitting here, he has helped us through the process just in the last month alone. And growing up in our career, there's been so many different leaders and internal mentors on how to progress within your career to get you to these positions. Yeah, you change as you the higher you climb up a ladder. By no means your job changes and what you do on a daily basis, but truly with the officers that we work with, they're a great team. Our command staff and our city administration is a great team. So there's so many helping hands to push you and guide you and bring you to the right spot.
Absolutely. Speaking of Chief Burns, we come from a legacy of having some amazing chiefs, but the thing that's always great about, bringing someone new into those type of positions is that they get to bring something new, something a little bit different. So why don't you just start by giving us your philosophy on policing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we sit in this room and there's two great leaders from our police department with us, with Chief Burns and Chief Barthel. Fantastic mentors through my career, fantastic mentors throughout a lot of our officers' careers. So, but the main thing that we have to look at with our job in general is that it's ever changing, right?
Yeah.
The way we approach what we do is important in how we do it. And never so much has it been important to be involved with the community, have outreach, have programs that involve the community in the process. So truly the philosophy of policing in itself, has a huge standpoint on community involvement and what that means. And again, community involvement, I think you and I talked about this the other day. What the community involvement is an ever-changing and growing aspect of our career and our life and the way we police things. What we ask of the community needs to change and evolve with the needs of what is important to our area.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's interesting because, as I was preparing for this and I'm thinking about, the potential challenges that you're going to have and the things that you're going to have to deal with in this change and go into this new space, you're going to have to manage recruiting, which is a little bit more difficult now, retention,
Absolutely,
which is a little bit more difficult now, diversifying, which is not easy, new training, mental health, marijuana is going to be a thing now. There's defund the police is out there in the world. Why would you want this job?
Yeah, well, very good question. Somebody has to step up though to that role and continue the path that our previous administration has provided for us.
Yeah.
Sioux Falls is a great community and they help pave the smoother road for us, so to speak. Our leaders are our guides, right? The reason you want to step up is because you want to continue that momentum that each chief has put before us with the community. We grew up here, John, also, and we raise our family here. We want the best for our families, our friends' families, everybody we have contacts with, families. So somebody has to step in that role to continue the progress and the momentum. Yeah, you're going to make it your own, right?
Yeah.
We're gonna do things different than Chief Burns and than Chief Barthel did because our world changes consistently, constantly changing, and we adapt to what's important to the city, the community, and our officers, and how we approach what we do on a daily basis.
Yeah. So as we just break up some of those different pieces, as we talk about community, especially, which is obviously something that's really big for me. what are some opportunities do you believe that we have to engage the community in a more profound way than we may have been able to in the past?
You know, I think there's a hunger out there for the community to be involved.
Yeah.
And I think the opportunities that exist, there's like people want to know what can they do in their community and how can they make our community a better place.
Mhm.
You know, and it's not saying that we have all the answers on how that's done. We have the law enforcement standpoint, but we need the community's help to do that, right? So the opportunities that exist is people in the community being involved, you know, and involves a generic term, right? Because you can be involved by calling in something but how do we expand that? Like our mentoring programs that we have within the city are a fantastic start. Our outreach programs, in the past few years, we started community resource officers, but how do we grow that into getting community members involved? The ambassador program, great way to show, okay, this is what law enforcement does. And this is where we're limited.
Yeah.
You know, because a lot of times we are reactive, but we want to be proactive on providing a safer community. And how do we do that? It can't just be a law enforcement standpoint, because we can't fix every problem.
For sure.
So the opportunities exist where we build or find programs where we get more involved with the community and show them what they can do to help us all.
Yeah.
And, you know, provide a safer environment for everybody.
Let's go a little bit further on that. What are 2 or 3 things right now you get a chance to set the stage for the community? You get to say, this is what we'd like to have from you. Give me 2 or 3 things that you would want the community to do more of, better of, start. What is 2 or 3 things as the potential chief that you would want to get us to that next level of excellence that we want to reach to? What are 2 or 3 things you would want from the community?
You know, I think right now, a big thing we need, and to stem off this whole mentoring aspect of what's been going on and what we need to grow on. We're seeing a rise recently with juvenile crime, violent juvenile crime, and that's concerning. You know, we've been very lucky and fortunate as a community not to have a serious injury or death.
Yeah.
But to get involved with the schools and juvenile programs to try and divert some of that action of our juvenile population from, you know, it's not, I wouldn't say it's even a gang thing. You know, they just decide that violence is an answer to handle a problem, but we need to show them that it's not. So that's one major thing, is if we can get involved with the juveniles, people get involved with juveniles' lives a little earlier on and provide that guidance to keep them away from that, that's going to be huge.
For sure.
And then, you know, the other impact is, John and I were actually talking about this a couple of weeks ago, because we have several instances where community involvement, community conversations, and the community calling in to provide information has impacted and solved crimes, right? By no means that's easier for us to do our job and do our job well if the community provides information that we need. But unfortunately, we have aspects and things that have happened, shootings that have happened, where we get no information. So whether you're the person that has the information or you know of a person that has the information, again, get involved, have those conversations, encourage people to step forward and step up to the plate and provide the information we're looking for.
Yeah. Let's touch more on both of those things.
Yeah.
So when we talk about that piece of it, right, a lot of that is a result of sometimes a lack of trust or a lack of connection, a lack of relationship. How do we start to address that lack of trust? Because whether we feel like it's of our doing or not, we know that we are tethered to a national narrative of what's happening with police. And so how do we start to develop that relationship, in particular in diverse communities?
You know, it really does start with the conversations, right? Whether they're comfortable or not comfortable, having an open and honest conversation where it's not confrontational or one-sided or pointing fingers or anything. It's important for us in law enforcement to understand where people are coming from, right?
Yeah.
To understand the community we serve, we got to understand how they're feeling about it. Whether it's an intentional feeling or not, it's important to us to talk about it and understand and see, okay, maybe I can change the way I do something just a little bit. And same with the other end of it too. They got to understand, we have a job to do, and how we do it can vary a little bit, you know, to an effect. But I truly think that the conversation is a good starting point, right? Yeah. And conversations get you to an area to start the climb of the trust ladder, right? And then it's the actions afterwards and the involvement afterwards that I think helps build that trust that's all important to make it easier for people to talk, you
Mhm.
know, and report crimes and get involved with other aspects of the community where they typically wouldn't.
Yeah. Well, let's roll that into engaging youth. One of the things that I talk about sometimes is everybody loves kids. Everybody wants to take care of kids. We all believe that we have to protect kids. And,
Absolutely.
the unfortunate reality of it is that we generally, as a population, care about kids until they grow up.
Right.
And there's a lot of people who have not had anything interrupt their life to change the way they see the world. They have not had the connections or that person in their lives that I know you, I, and John have had. How do we do a better job, and how do we hold ourselves accountable to really engaging? Because we're starting to see what happens if we don't.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
So help me understand how we could be better in that space, and with some things we might be able to do there.
You know, it's just the promotion of what we do, right?
Mhm.
It's finding different ways that's out of your comfort zone to find areas or people or communities or groups that we aren't involved with, right?
Mhm.
Like, yeah, we can go, like I went my whole juvenile life with probably out having to talk to an officer that my dad knows about, right? But, you know, he's sitting in the corner, but I won't tell him. But it's just truly your environment you grew up. But how do we find those areas so something doesn't change when they become an adult or
Yes.
teenager, you know? And there really truly isn't a great answer, but you have to push towards reaching and expanding out of your comfort zone, right?
Yeah.
You got to find different groups, and we have a lot of great community engagement from our officers. They do a really good job. You know, obviously sometimes we focus on those core areas like downtown. Okay. Sometimes we got our downtown foot patrols and officers engaging with the businesses and the people that visit downtown on a daily basis. Different than when you expand out to Pettigrew. And then we have that group of officers that expand to Pettigrew. But how do you reach further out and around to the east side of Sioux Falls, northeast side of Sioux Falls? And I think we got to find ways to continue that expansion, those hands-on, those face-to-face contacts that are positive, you know, building the relationship with those communities, those young people, and let them know, you know, truly we care about what happens here. You know, it's not always about running and arresting the bad guy like when we were 21 years old. Because I'm not, but
Yeah.
you know, it's finding ways to kind of dive yourself into those areas, and then you kind of expand what you're already doing, just not where you were comfortable with.
For sure.
Yeah.
So going with that, because I think for a lot of people, if you just grab somebody off the street and you say, you know, what are police supposed to do? And they'll say, catch criminals.
Right.
You know, and I think that's a real short-sighted view of how you can think about it. Right now, we're in a moment where the nation is wrestling with how we think about policing, what's in the book, so to speak.
Right.
And even if something is by the book, is it the best thing? Is it the right thing? All of those different type of things. There's many initiatives out there. One of which that came post George Floyd, 8 Can't Wait, is one of the big ones. I'll give you guys those 8 if you're not familiar with them. Banning chokeholds or strangleholds, require de-escalation, require a warning before shooting, require that all alternatives be exhausted before shooting, require officers to intervene when excessive force is being used, ban shooting and moving vehicles, establish a force continuum, require comprehensive reporting. So this is one of the things that came out of it, of 8 things police organizations can do to advance. There's a lot of things like this.
Yeah.
I don't know, what are we grabbing onto, or what do you see on the horizon as ways for us? And I don't mean just answering a problem.
Right.
I mean best in class. I think sometimes what gets lost in this is we say, okay, where's the problem? How do we fix the problem? Versus saying, are we doing this the best way possible on the planet Earth?
Yep. No, and it kind of goes back to what I was touched on a little bit before. You know, a lot of times we are reactive to a problem. Right?
Yeah.
So you examine something that already happened.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Proactively looking at the way we do things in the list that you provided is something we're already doing. You know, pre-George Floyd, after George Floyd, it's important to know in the community to know that, yeah, we re-examined all those and made changes, and we have a company that looks at our policies and stuff and guides us a little bit, you know. But, you know, it goes back to, it's important to be proactive ahead of those things and not always reactive. And you can't always predict what's going to happen, but if we constantly have a good review process of what we're doing in general, I mean, that kind of helps it. But it also, you know, we don't have all the answers.
Right.
We have we have us and we have our experts within what we do, and we have our people we pay from outside agencies to review what we do. We have our city administration. We have community members. We need more community members to be like, hey, this is what I see.
Yeah.
Okay, well, then we might have to explain why we do what we do, and maybe that would make sense at the time, whatever the topic would be. But it's having that larger grasp on looking in on what we do as a whole, and providing the best product, the best customer service we can to the Sioux Falls area.
For sure. Well, to that point, when we talk about the idea of having grace, right? Because this is a tough job and people are going to make mistakes. And I think the grace that people have for mistakes is directly connected to the level of accountability.
Yeah.
Under your leadership, how would you manage the accountability, not just for just the policy and procedure, but also a certain level of customer service and engagement? How do you plan on addressing that?
Honestly, we have a really good review process in place, and it's not just a singular review. It's not just one person looking at it, making a decision and it being over with, right? It has several steps to it, and it has steps outside of our purview with the city administration, HR getting involved. So, I think it's obviously good to continue that aspect of review process, because if you narrow it down to one, that's where we make mistakes or miss something, right?
Yeah.
But, and on the other aspect of it, being open and transparent about what we do and how we do it and what happened, there's a lot of accountability. There's a lot of things we can't speak of that have happened, but it's being held accountable of who we are, on an integrity standpoint and what we do on a daily basis, and not discounting the other, 300 employees that we have that do a fantastic job every day, and not the one mistake that's out there from somebody choosing a wrong decision at the time.
Absolutely. How can we have the community participate in developing these next gen ways of thinking about things?
Truly, it really depends on what it is, right? So it's important to have that community input and have an open ear, right? So that's kind of a broad spectrum of what we do on a daily basis too. It's not just on that aspect, but there's a lot of aspects of law enforcement where community can have an input. And it's important to say, well, I see this going on in this place. What do you guys think of it, right?
Yeah.
So, and then it's on our shoulders to be open and review it and see if it's best for what Sioux Falls needs and what the Sioux Falls Police Department needs.
Yeah. So naturally, there are going to be situations where everybody's not vibing. Right. Whereas, it's easy to talk about these things where everything's good and it's mostly good here most of the time.
Right.
How should someone like you be communicated to, engaged with, held accountable in those moments where it is uncomfortable, in the moments where everybody's not jiving and not seeing it that way? What is the best way to get through to you?
Honestly, just have that open, straightforward conversation, right? There's no reason to kind of beat around the bush or go around curve or not provide all the details or information. Like you just got to provide, this is what happened. These are the details of what happened. And then we kind of look at it and evaluate it from there, being open and transparent with each other and ourselves and everybody. I mean, truly that's kind of our mission, right? You got to be open-minded, open to the problem, and transparent throughout as best as you can. Obviously there's some legal things we can't provide throughout processes, but for me, to get to me, you'd have to just, here's what I know. And then we kind of got to dissect it from there and see what exactly happened.
Yeah. So you have to, you got to get some folks in here, right? We are always on the short side of it, which limits our ability to have folks get out of the vehicle and engage with communities and do some of those different things. So as we talk about retention and we talk about, which is probably even more difficult, recruitment, it's not an easy time to be a police officer at this particular moment.
Yeah.
So right now, assuming that we have people in this community that are looking at the profession potentially, and assuming that this is being beamed out to folks all over the nation, make a pitch for why someone should, number one, engage in law enforcement, period, but in particular with this institution.
We've been talking about this the whole time. Sioux Falls is a fantastic community as a whole, right? I think Sioux Falls sells itself.
Yeah.
Right. Truly, it is a generally safe place. We have our problems and we address them and we mount. I think Sioux Falls has a lot to offer for people coming here and working. And to get back to your point, like, how do we bring in the best candidates and diversify that, you know, and we reach, and it's hard to find enough people to come in, right? And diverse to match our population enough. And back to, and it's going to go back a lot about this too, especially with John and I, it's like community involved in these processes and encouraging people that you think would be good in law enforcement. Not everybody's made to do this job, right? And sometimes you find out right away once they start, but but when you truly have that reach, like if you know somebody that you think could do the job and do the job well, if they don't apply, how do we know? You know, how do we spread that around, you know, and make that impact within our town?
Yeah. So now, flip side to that, give a disclaimer for anybody that might want to join this institution, because of the, I believe, 8,000 law enforcement agencies. Not all of them are excellent.
Right.
Not all of them are trying to be. And so as people come from wherever it is they're coming from to join this agency, what do they need to know about being on this particular force? What do they need to come with? What do they need to understand about what it takes to be SFP?
Well, I don't give them a disclaimer. I mean, this is a great agency. So, you know, and all jokes aside, it's like prepared to be a hardworking officer that's community driven. Like, honestly, you have to have those relationships with the community member, prepare to work hard and do what's best for the area. That's our disclaimer. If that's not what how you become or why you became a police officer, I don't know why people would otherwise in that, but but expect that here. Truly expect that here.
I think everybody says it.
Yeah.
But it's just, you know, the reality of it. Are people ready for that?
Yeah, you know, and it goes back to not everybody's ready for doing the job, right? And doing the job here compared to a small town USA is a completely different job. Doing the job here versus a large city, or, you know, we're becoming a metropolitan area. But doing the job here versus, you know, an Omaha or Dallas, you know, something quite a bit larger, it's a different job, what we do.
Yeah.
This is still, and will be for a while, a large town with a small town feel.
Yeah.
Right. So expect to be involved with the businesses and the community and the people of this town if you're going to come work here.
Yeah. Before we get Lieutenant Toome up here, let me say this, because you're going to be taking over, you know, a potentially a large organization with a lot of folks in it, different backgrounds, all those different type of things. What kind of leader can they expect from you, and what type of culture will you be working to create within this agency?
Yeah, and this isn't to kind of boast anybody up, but we truly have fantastic examples within our city leadership right now with the mayor and our current chiefs and our past administration and what they laid out for us. John said it the other day that Chief Burns handed us keys to a pretty nice car. Don't mean to steal your quote, John.
It's okay.
I'll expand upon it, you know. It's about turning a Corvette into a Ferrari, you know what I mean? Like, how do we truly bring this agency to the best that we can, right? And internally, we have some fantastic, absolutely fantastic men and women on our team, right? They go out there, they work hard, they run and run and run, and then find time to do other aspects of this job that we ask of them that are super important, what we discussed. And, you know, the challenges that we face, as we talk about with recruitment and intention, puts a lot of stress on these people, and we know it, and they still come to work every day with a smile on their face and try to do the best job they can do. So I think what they can look from, and I know my counterpart over here is not much different, you know, truly we look for the successes of our people, being a servant leader, right? Like, how do I make you the best officer you can be or reach your goals? Very internally important for us, right? And will always be, like, whatever your goals may be, whether it's a class or a position or department, how do I push you to that? But, you know, expanding that, and how do I push you to being a better officer? How do I push you to be a better family member, better community member? That's what we got. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate you so much.
Thank you.
We're going to switch over. Thank you so much. Give it up for Lieutenant Cook.
Thank you.
Am I too early?
No.
Okay,
We have,
gotcha. All right.
we have to give you your
Seat,
proper
Lieutenant.
fanfare.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah.
Lieutenant John Toome started his career with the Sioux Falls Police Department as a patrol officer in 2005. In his 16-year career, he has worked as a field training officer, department training officer, sergeant, lieutenant, and SWAT commander, providing him with a high-level strategic perspective and expertise in all facets of law enforcement and community relations. Lieutenant Toome helped lead the department's response to the civil unrest during the summer of 2020 and has also represented the Sioux Falls Police Department in many community forums designed to engage residents in constructive dialogue. In his prior role as patrol sergeant, he established relationships with neighborhood associations and community groups that form the foundation for the Sioux Falls Police Department's community outreach. He was awarded the Chief Clark Queering Award for Excellence in 2020, VFW Officer of the Year recognition in 2017, and Shift Commendation Medal in 2016. Lieutenant Toome also earned a unit citation in 2020 for his leadership in the department's civil disturbance response. Lieutenant Toome holds a bachelor's degree in business administration from the University of Sioux Falls, where he also serves as an adjunct instructor. Lieutenant Toome was raised in Sioux Falls and resides there with his wife and 3 children. Please join me in giving Lieutenant Toome a warm Rotary welcome.
Yes. We got to stop letting you guys write your own bios.
Well, it'd be even longer if I wrote it.
I guess.
I got a bone to pick, though. This is my 5th time at the Rotary, and I don't have a name tag back there yet. I don't know, is there a punch card, or how many visits do you need?
You know
before
what?
you get a
Done,
name
done,
tag?
and done. We're gonna get that figured out
Yeah,
for you.
make that
guys.
happen for me. Vine.
Yes, for sure.
all right.
I don't know if the chief gets an honorary one, but we should probably look into that. Which is where we will start.
Yeah.
Just again referencing Chief Burns when he started. You know, he always had a salt and pepper thing going. Now it's a lot more salt and pepper. So this job ages you. So I'm gonna ask you the same question. Why would you want to do this?
Well, I think if you talk to either Nick or I when we first signed up, neither one of us wanted to be chief.
Mhm.
Right. In fact, I think if you showed up at the police department with your end goal of being the chief, we should probably just show you the door quickly and usher you out, because that's not what in line with the profession. The profession just doesn't lend itself to people who think that way. But through your career, things progress and things develop, and things start trending in a certain direction, and then as things develop, you're like, okay, this is maybe what my fortune or what's in my future for me. And what drives that is not a sense of accomplishment or title. It's a sense of service to your department and service to your community. And ultimately, this act of putting forward for this job is, I'm willing to take on that role to serve this community in that highly stressful function, which could be a glorious success or a glorious disaster, right? As we've seen nationwide.
For sure.
That this comes with high consequence and it comes with a lot of responsibility. And so, again, I think if you have somebody whose sole goal is to be chief, when they show up, that's the wrong. But if things develop that way and that service brings you to that point, I think that's where both Nick and I are at, where we feel that we can best serve the department and the community in that role. And that's why we put in. And by the way, if you hadn't come to terms with all these things, you never should have hit send on the application.
Yeah.
Right. And same thing with becoming a police officer, kind of building off what you said with Nick. There's a couple realities, which I won't go into, but if you haven't come to grips with those realities, don't hit send on the application, because there's some internal soul searching and understanding of what you're getting into that has to come before you make that step. So,
Yeah, absolutely. So when you think about those things in this position and all that comes with it and all of the weight of it and those type of things, what do you think this position can do to better an organization like this? I don't think most people have a real idea of what the day-to-day of a chief of police looks like. But
to be honest, maybe I don't either yet. You know,
Right.
And that's one thing too, is like you work through the organization, you trust who's ahead of you to fill your role, and everybody has a job and everybody has a function, and you work through that. And even just in the past month, kind of getting more a glimpse into what Chief Burns deals with and understanding just that role within the city, within the vision that the city has and everything in between. It's really not just the department, it's the city as a whole that position influences. And I think it's something that you have to be ready for and understand, but also be willing to say, okay, here's where my personality interjects, here's where I come in, and here's where I think I can add something new, because it's progressive from Chief Barthel to Chief Burns to whoever takes over next. We're all standing on each other's shoulders to kind of build that department up and make those steps and be proactive, try to be in line with best practices and best standards, but keep building on what's the foundation that's there. I think we're not coming in to try to rebuild something. We're here to just make it better. As you said last time we got together, you said, I think, unless you're the best police department in the country, you should always be working to be better.
For sure.
And that's just central to who we've always been. That's just always been part of our drive. And that's just something we recognize as part of doing business. And I think that's the next chief's job, is to bring their ideas and influence and keep building on what's there.
Yeah. So speaking of, which is one of the things that I'm really excited about, both of you as candidates, is that you're both community focused.
Yep.
What are some ways that we could better engage our communities, both ways, to, number one, participate and engage on that piece of it, but also how do we go to people? A lot of times, when anybody wants to engage a community, particularly in our diverse communities, we set up a thing someplace and they have to trek to the thing.
Yep.
How do we go to people a little bit more so that they understand that we want to develop those relationships?
So post Ferguson, and I was involved in a lot of the forums and conversations after that too. And again, we're not Johnny come lately to this party, right? As far as community outreach and working different things and working different resources, we held 15 plus forums throughout the community with police interaction. With the Multicultural Center helped facilitate some of that. Remember, the first one was at Augustana Lutheran Church, and we went in, and it was where the Hispanic community met up there. And so we came in. It was me. There was a firefighter that came along too. We're trying to do the community outreach piece, and there was 8 people there, right? And we advertised it. We went to the church where they were at. 8 people showed up. Had the best tamales I've ever had. Right? Outstanding food. And afterwards, we started talking. And we're like, well, how come nobody else is here? Well, they're convinced that you're immigration, right? That you're gonna do some sort of roundup, all right? So we talked through, worked through, built some trust and understanding. Next time we went to a Hispanic community church, it was at Our Lady of Guadalupe over on east side of town, and 50 people showed up. Went after a church service, engaged them, had conversation, had a translator to work it out, and did different things. And said it had a few successes and failures through that different thing, but you have to keep trying. You have to try to meet people where they're at, like finding locations where it's beneficial, not necessarily, we don't want to have it at the police department, right? Come to the police department, come hear the cops talk, right? You know, we're gonna go out and engage with people out in their community. Even with Coffee with a Cop, when we first started running that, we're saying, hey, we're not necessarily putting Coffee with a Cop maybe with certain spots that we need to be. If you want to come to McDonald's on 41st and Min, we're gonna get the clientele from McDonald's on 41st and Min, which used to be my grandpa and his buddies, right?
Yeah.
But if we go to Shalom Coffee House or different coffee houses, we'll get different interactions. And I think we have to try things and adjust to how they work, and then try different avenues and different approaches. And I think that's a piece of community outreach. But the reality is we can have Snickers and stickers and cops and carts and fishing with cops and all these different programs and all these different community outreach pieces. Unless they're anchored to some personal relationship or personal interaction, they're really not going to matter when chaos happens, right?
Yeah.
When chaos happens, emotion will start to rule, right? And we talked about it in previous things. What are we doing? Not necessarily about the first rock, it's the second rock. I think, to quote, unquote you, right? Like, what are we doing? And those are more built on personal interactions and relationships, which comes back to, we talk about, we have programs, they're great, they do great things, and we need to keep working on that and keep those interactions, but also the day-to-day interactions officers have. And it's very difficult, like you mentioned, right? Our numbers aren't where we're fully staffed. We're running call to call to call, but to take the extra time and interact with the community. And even that isn't easy sometimes. Last summer, you know, the career obviously was very difficult. We're in the midst of COVID. I'm in my office because as lieutenant, we end up being more office bound. And I'm like, I need to fill up my cup a little bit. I'm going to go find some kids to play catch with. Right. So I'm going to go, because I love playing catch with the football. Right? I just love this, getting out of the car quick, interact. So I drove to 5 different parks, couldn't find a kid outside. They're all inside on their technology. So now you're like, okay, how do I interact with kids differently now, since I can't play catch with them? I can't go find them, and look for ways to meet them where they're at in different locations and have those interactions. But yeah, it's a moving target, right? What didn't work or what worked in the past won't always work in the future, and we have to just be able to adjust and pivot different directions.
Well, I think that's a prime example. That's a good point. You know, how do we approach this in this different way? Technology makes it different. Our immigrant refugee populations outside of, you know, maybe being English second language, having generational gaps there. And then obviously the rhetoric around those folks isn't always healthy or welcoming. How do you get those to those different type of groups and create those relationships? Folks who are at a mosque or folks who are at a temple or whatever it is. How do we start to do that?
Yeah, and we've been invited into mosques on several occasions. I've attended services at two of the mosques and interacted with people and finding different ways maybe that are outside of what we're used to. Here's one, for example, and we're trying different things. Like we sit around and we talk about ideas. What could we try differently? What could we do? One of our lieutenants in town recently started coaching a youth refugee soccer team along with some community members with that group. And he got involved, started recognizing, okay, how can we help these kids get this soccer program going, right? Because sports is sometimes it's the universal language. Soccer in particular is the universal language since it's the most popular game in the world. So he starts coaching, helping out, finds some needs through the police department union, the fire department union, comes up with some funds and some sources, gets the kids the equipment they need. He's driving them to practices. And interesting enough, we take something for granted sometimes, as easy as trying to call somebody to pick them up for practice. But when you don't have a phone and you don't have internet, that becomes pretty difficult. And then you start Snapchatting people to see where you can pick them up from and try to get that to work, because that's how kids communicate. Well,
do you have a Snapchat?
I do not. I have one. Yeah. So we'd have to come up with an official Snapchat. And that's just the thing. And so working with these kids and with the support from other parts of the department, from the union side of things, got them entered in a soccer tournament a couple weekends ago, and they win the championship in the soccer tournament, right? And for those kids, with a police officer helping coach them and working and learning together, for them, it was the World Cup.
Yeah.
You know, for a lot of other people, it wasn't that, maybe in another soccer tournament, right? But to create that experience, and that's all helped with. And how do they look at other places around the country, they have a lot of sports centered where police are involved in that. But again, carving out the time, because the community still has demands of us too. They don't want us out just playing sports all day.
Sure.
we got some crimes we got to work with. We got some other issues you want from us, but we have to find ways to interact with the community and that are a little bit different. And I think try some things. Some things will work, some things won't. But hopefully for those kids in that group now, they have a positive anchored memory of their interaction with a police officer that we can build from.
Well, to that point, you know, we're talking about a situation where significant diversity is coming within our schools that is going to be upon us in the coming years. The migration patterns and the folks that are coming there, you know, the makeup of what this is, going from small city to more of a metropolis, is significant. So I'll pose the question the same way. What are 2 or 3 things that you need from the community, that you would like to see from the community to allow us to address that, as well as some of the other things that we're dealing with?
Sure. You talk about immigration and refugees and interactions and the changing dynamic. So Lutheran Social Services has long invited us in to give our orientation to all new Americans, right? That's a good example of a community partnership we have, where everyone who comes through that refugee resettlement site, one of their first interactions is a police officer. Really, it doesn't matter what we say. It's just that we're friendly, courteous, create a positive interaction that we can build from, right? So what other programs or communities are in there? Because there's first generation, but then there's secondary migration, like you mentioned. I may get resettled to St. Joseph, Missouri, but then I move to Sioux Falls because of the opportunity and the jobs that are there. And how do we interact with our different agencies? We have a great relationship with Smithfield, like where we have open communication lines and dialogue. And I think that's important too, where we're finding ways to interact that are maybe outside of the normal channels. And then as far as the community's involvement, like it's great. The community can ask for things, but the community can also present ideas and plans that are more developed. You know, like we talked about, you mentioned with Nick earlier about the defund the police thing, right? Which immediately throws us into polarizing camps where we dig our trenches and well, we never really have a conversation. I'm like, with mental health, you talk about mental health and one thing in particular. I'll tell you, if somebody presents me a plan where we can not go to mental health calls, right? Yeah, for the cost of X, Y, and Z, show me where to sign. I mean, I say that half joking, half curious, but let's come up with a plan. Let's say, okay, this is something we can partner with you on developing. We've already done that with tried different things with our community resource officer program. And Sarah Van Vorst is out working actively cases, partnering with Southeast Behavioral Health, taking proactive visits to people in the community, working on getting them the health and the care that they need. And it's a perfect example of police and the private sector and other organizations working together. And can we build on that? Can we expand on that idea? With the link opening up, the link will not roll out as a perfectly functional, hey, this is going to work perfectly right now from the start. It's going to take time, right? We'll develop what we're doing with it, how it's going, how to best utilize those resources, and how as law enforcement can we work with them to make that the most impactful thing. I think a lot of what happens is we talk about cops, we talk about courts, we talk about corrections. This is the 4 C's model again. There still is the community, but those 3 aren't partnering with the community for different initiatives and ideas, and the community's not presenting what they'd like to see. It's really hard to implement something different or try something new.
Yeah. So going into youth, we talk about youth. That's a big thing. Not only is it, one of our biggest assets, right? Not only is it likely going to be the workforce you're going to have to draw from, but right now it also is a unique challenge in terms of, as we talk about some of the different increasing violence and things of that nature. What is your plan, or what are some thoughts that you have about engaging youth, starting to bridge that gap, moving from it being an issue to something where we're helping to develop these folks so they have an opportunity to be successful?
Like I said, we talked about the soccer program for one thing, right? That's just one little example. But we look at mentorship, what's out there, and how can police support with existing mentorship programs. So a cop may not be your mentor, right? But as part of that mentorship program, the Sioux 52 initiative, which Rotary has pushed and been involved in quite a bit, how can we enter law enforcement into that conversation, right? It may not be every single time somebody's meeting with somebody, but how do we get that law enforcement component where, hey, we're meeting a cop today for a pop, or we're meeting a cop today for this, or we're doing different things. We talked about the school resource officer program, and we've talked about it before too, because we went at the same high school at the same time with the same school resource officer, right? Who just retired a couple of years ago. And but that's another great opportunity we have. And I think nationwide, where we're talking about pulling police officers out of schools, I think here we're a model of where police officers in schools are a great way to make connections and a great way to make relationships grow and to build that positive anchor point with law enforcement and to push out from there. It's really, again, for kids young, we've handed out so many stickers, right? But stickers don't necessarily create long-lasting bonds or relationships with the cops, right? Oh, we become a glorified sticker dispensers for small kids. Well, just because we hand somebody a sticker, that's a great thing to do, right? It's a great thing to start building that, but it progresses from that point further. That we're always looking for ways to interact, and I think that's where the community can really work with us. Again, I talked about these programs either. There's so many, Carts and Kids, all the stickers and Snickers and all these different things we've tried. We've tried those types of things. And the reality is we could sit back on our laurels and say, yeah, it's good enough, right? Yeah. No, we're still doing those programs. COVID obviously, took a chunk out of them for a bit, but we'll get back into doing those programs and keep building on them and looking for new ways to interact. But again, when we get to chaos, when we get to a bad moment, right? When stuff's really going to go bad, potentially, all the programs in the world may not help, right? But it's how people come together, say, no, this is what we need to do. We need to pump the brakes, put this on. Let's now have that thoughtful conversation rather than react in a way that's different, and take time to listen to each other and understand each other.
Absolutely. What does accountability look like in your administration? Well,
there's no question within the department as far as what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. Like I said, like we stand by our ethics, doing the job the right way, making sure things are done correctly. And I think Lieutenant Cook talked about it too. There's an extensive review process for almost everything that happens. And as a supervisor, that becomes part of what you do on a day-to-day basis. And people are held accountable for the actions that they take. And I think it's something that mistakes are made, right? Like I personally have made a mistake, right? We all have made mistakes because we're fallible as human beings. My mistake is I rolled into a park one time to deal with somebody who was urinating in the middle of the park, hit my button on my flashers, right? 2 clicks over hits the camera, 1 click over hits the yellows, because I had to come across onto the curb to do it. I click 1 over 1 time, right? And I think I hit my lights, but I missed. The lights will automatically activate your camera and automatically activate your body mic, right? That's the reality of it. So I get out, he goes from urinating to actively fighting me, right? And we have a physical interaction in the park. I take him into custody without incident, right? But I had to bring him to the ground to do so. And in doing so, go back, check the camera. My camera never turned on. I made a mistake, right? Now, there's tons of witnesses, even the guy's own buddies were like, yeah, he shouldn't have done that. Right. Because in that situation, we interviewed everybody that's there because it's how it's general for a use of force. But I had to take my discipline, right? Which is counseling, making sure we do things the right way, making sure things are taken care of. Because I'm sharing that with you because that's just part of our culture, right? Even minor mistakes with really no ramifications are dealt with, addressed, looked at, training is given, counseling is given, and we look at always making ourselves accountable and better. I don't think people realize that like really the depth and measure we go to make sure that all things are followed and that we make sure we're doing things the right way.
How could they better understand that? I think sometimes what happens is the police become a sub-community of themselves. It feels as if, and then there's police and then there's everybody else. I think we all want to live in a world where the police are of the community, for the community, by the community, including the community, that type of thing. How do we better educate people on the things that are happening so they know all those
things? So
things?
Citizens Police Academy is one thing we've put out, right? But really, we should encourage more people who maybe aren't necessarily like pro-police fans, right? Like they're saying there, hey, you do this, to come to Citizens Police Academy. Take a time to really learn from us, to say, here's our presentation on what we do and how we do, right? Because I can be in this camp over here and say you do everything wrong without ever actually hearing what you actually do, right? By actually, okay, I'm not gonna get away and just be vulnerable myself and take the time to listen and understand. The other thing is, we put out I'm a little biased, but I think we've done a great job of putting out some videos recently. Like, hey, here's the SFPD, here's this, and this, like just different videos we've put out on our social media. I remember a couple years ago, we shot a promo for downtown Sioux Falls on traffic issues and pedestrian issues. It got 0 traction. Right? Nobody retweeted it. Nobody reposted it. Nobody watched it. It had 100 views. Right. And so like we're clamoring for, we want all this information from the police. Right. And we'll put information out, but you kind of have to consume it if we put it out. Right. And make sure that it's not just something we're saying, but we're actually going to look at it and then actually put it out. And again, I went through the website the other day. I'm like, well, how can we make this more accessible? I'm just thinking to myself, like, how can we make this even more accessible? But again, as community, if we put out content, like, help it along a little bit, push it along a little bit and say, hey, maybe you should watch this. This is something that we want to engage with. And I think that's where the community comes in too. It's like, we want to make sure that, hey, if good things are happening, we're supporting that and pushing that across the board. We like to share the stuff that's not so positive, but let's share the positive stuff too.
We talked about the recruitment piece of it and all those other type of things. Can I have you give us what your job description is? If you're putting out a job description of what it looks like to be SFPD, what does that job description look like?
Absolutely. And again, the recruitment piece, where's the camera? Kind of look into it. We want the best. We want you. Come join the SFPD, right? So when I got hired here, I grew up Pettigrew Heights, 16th in Duluth. Right? And like I said, my paper route was Pettigrew Heights. I thought I had a pretty good take on what happened in Sioux Falls in 2005. I know the community. Like I said, this will be pretty interesting. I had no idea, right? It was busy, involved stuff that I thought, I'd spend more time doing traffic stops and accidents than going 911 calls. No, not the case at all. My first ride along showed me that actually, which Nick took me on, by the way, my first ride along. And so Sioux Falls Police Department is a metro police department, right? 300 plus employees, 281 sworn officer strength at this point. Like if you come here, this is a department that works hard, does things the right way. And honestly, we have plenty of work to do. And we want people who are going to do things the right way, who are going to work their best. We want the best, the brightest, and people who are ethically, moral, and driven, right? To be engaged with the community, interact with the community. Because ultimately, as you didn't give me this question earlier, but you gave it to Nick about why would you ever want this job, right? Right? Yeah, people across the country will say, why would you want to be a cop right now? Well, if your service drives you, like service drives a lot of us, then this is the job for you. There are high highs and low lows, but there is nothing quite like the satisfaction of serving your community and making a positive impact. And sometimes you'll never know, like I said, whether or not, that was the call or this was the call that made the difference.
Yeah.
But I knew I picked this profession because I knew when it was all said and done, when I hung it up, I knew at some point along the way, and this is no disrespect to anybody who lives a life of sales, I did more than sell something, right? For me personally, I wanted something that I knew possibly made a difference in my community and somebody else's life. And having grandfathers who were vets, my father who's a minister, but also a vet, like that was my level of service that I wanted to give. So if service drives you, then this is the job for you. And we're the department for you, because I can say it, I've never worked with or met better people than I have in the Sioux Falls Police Department. And I think that's why we want even more of the best. And again, that's local. I know people from around the country, there's a lot of talk about officers moving to different parts. Yeah, we're interested in the best applicants, no matter where they're from, but they have to understand that this is the SFPD way, right? And we're going to keep working and trying to be better.
Yeah. What happens if he gets the gig?
I'll back him 100%. Like I said, we're going to sit here and talk to Nick and I today, but if you sat down with the other captains and the other lieutenants right now, you'd be immensely impressed with that leadership team, right? And the sergeants below them and the officers below them. We're all on the same boat, the same car, whatever analogy you want, right? We're all headed in the same direction. It just matters what seat we're in, right? But we're all working as a team and we're all pulling together. And so whoever gets it, if Nick gets it, great. Like I said, we go way back. We've been friends for a long time. And I know the same thing from Nick. If I was selected as chief, he'll have my back too, and we'll work together. This is not, as you mentioned too, this is a competition. It's a selection. It's ultimately, and by the way, there's no election for this. I think we can kind of put that to bed. Like people seem to be somewhat confused as to how this process works, right? There's no election.
Right.
You don't need to vote anywhere, right? But we work together, and we'll keep that because that's part of our organization's culture, is that we work together and we strive to be the best together.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate it. These gentlemen both committed to sticking around and taking some questions. If you want to ask some questions for those that are in the room, for all of our Rotarians. Outside of that, I'm extremely excited. Like I said, we have a history of having great chiefs, and I know that we'll have another great one with the gentleman that we have available to us right now. I encourage everyone to participate, educate themselves on these things as much as possible, really develop some deeper questions that we weren't able to get to today. And I encourage you to engage these folks, and no matter who is the chief, I think you'll both be open to those type of questions and people engaging. So with that, I thank you so very much, and thank you for another great Rotary program.
Lieutenant Cook and Lieutenant Toome, thank you very much for joining us today. And thank you on behalf of Downtown Rotary for seeking out what is no doubt an important role in this community. It takes a lot of bravery, and we are, as members of this community that care deeply about the outcome of this city, we extend our support to the two of you for this journey that you are on. All right, next week will be an important program that Jack Marsh will be moderating called Serving Those Who Served. And then we will not be meeting on July 5th following the 4th of July weekend, but then we'll reconvene here on July 12th, where we'll have our annual meeting and have the Rotarian of the Year award presented. Plus, Congressman Dusty Johnson will be our guest, and that will be our program. So, got important programs coming up on June 28th and July 12th. With that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.